welcome to Simpler Bible, a daily journey to biblical understanding. Well, today we find ourselves in a very exciting chapter, Matthew 13, and it is parable after parable of the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is what I've entitled this one. Let's begin in Matthew 13:1. That same day, so where we left off yesterday, that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. And great crowds gathered around him so that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on the rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, since they had no root, and they withered away. Other seed fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them out. And other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. The one who has ears to hear, let him hear. Then the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to the people in parables? And he answered them and said, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. So there's kind of our theme for this chapter. But to them it has not been given. For to the one who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. This is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. So that's a callback to Isaiah 6, 9 through 10. May this people be ever seeing, but never perceiving, ever hearing, but never understanding. And so I grew up in church, been in church my entire life, and more than half my life now I've been preaching. But what I was taught growing up is that Jesus spoke in parables so that his sermons would be easier to understand. That is the exact opposite of why Jesus says he spoke in parables. Jesus says, I speak to them in parables because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not understand. He said right before that, he says, to you it's been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. So he's keeping these things secret from the Jews. Jesus was speaking in parables so that the people would not understand. And you're going, well, why would he do that? Ultimately, so that they would crucify him. 1 Corinthians 2, 8, and 9. Oh, look, I've already made a note of it down here, so that's redundant. But 1 Corinthians 2, 8, and 9 says that if they had believed in the Lord of glory, they wouldn't have crucified him. So he says, indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is filled, saying, you will indeed hear, but never understand, indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull. With their ears they can barely hear. With their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand and turn and be healed. So he's speaking to them in parables so that they will not see, so that they will not understand, and so that they won't turn to him. This is a reference sort of forward to Romans 11:25, where a hardening has happened to the Jews until the full number of Gentiles should come in. But, he says, but blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. So we come back up and we say, look, verse 11, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. To them it has not been given. They don't believe, but you believe. So there's the contrast. For truly I say to you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see and didn't see it, and hear what you hear and didn't hear it. And so Jesus is speaking to the people in parables so that they won't understand. If somebody comes to you at some point, you're at a pastor's conference, or you hear your preacher say, the reason that Jesus spoke in parables was so that everybody would understand, that person has not read their Bible very well. So this is here in Matthew 13. It's also in Mark chapter 4. It's clear in the text why Jesus spoke in the parables. So he's going to go on and give this parable. He's going to explain it now to his disciples. And he says, hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the message of the kingdom, the word of the kingdom, and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches it away, what has been sown in his heart. That is what was sown along the path. So anyone who hears the message of God but doesn't understand it, it's like the seed that fell on the cart path that the birds came and stole away. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, but he has no root in himself. He endures for a little while, and when tribulation and persecution arise on account of the word, he immediately falls away. So the idea of the seed that fell on the rocky soil, it's so shallow that you remember putting a lima bean or a pinto bean when you were in elementary school in a Ziploc bag with the wet paper towel, and you taped it to your window and you'd watch it grow. And eventually what would happen is that lima bean or the pinto bean would sprout some roots and push down, and eventually it would push up. Well, you can imagine that if there's nowhere for it to go down, it's going to break the soil more quickly. So if there's no place for the seed's roots to go down, it's going to break the soil, and it's going to look like it's planted and it's growing really quickly, except for what? The moment the sun comes out, the root system, because there's nothing for it to grab onto, withers. And so he says the same thing here. These are people who get excited about the message of the kingdom, but the moment persecution arises, they're like, we're done, we're out. Those that were sown by the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of the riches choke the word and it proves unfruitful. So this is where the thorns grew up quicker than the plant and choke it out. And then he says, as for what was sown on the good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. And that's the difference between the first three. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, and another 60, and another 30. So only one of these four soils is actually someone who's put faith in Jesus. The rest, two of the ones in the middle, can look like someone who's put faith in Jesus. They receive it with joy, but watch them and you'll see that the deceitfulness of wealth or the persecutions of this life cause them to turn away from it. He put another parable to the people saying, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a man who sowed good seed in the field. I want to go back up here really quickly. He says here, he told them many parables saying, a sower went out to sow. And then we're going to come back down here. And he says, a man who sowed good seed in his field. So verse 24. He said, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. While his servants were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then left. When the plants came up and bore grain, the weeds also appeared. The servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, the enemy has done this. So the servants said, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to go and gather them up? But he said, no, lest in gathering up the weeds, you uproot the wheat as well. Let both grow together until the harvest. At the harvest time, I will tell the reapers, gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but then gather the wheat into my barn. So there's a good man who sows wheat in his field, and an enemy at night comes and sows weeds among the freshly sown wheat. And they grow up together, and there's weeds and wheat. And the servants say, do you want us to go pull up the weeds? He goes, no, you might accidentally pull up some of the wheat as well. So just wait. And at the harvest, we'll pull them both up. We'll throw the weeds into the fire, and we'll gather the wheat into the barn. This makes me think a little bit of Romans 9, 22 through 23, where it's talking about objects of wrath and objects of mercy. Those who are destined for the wrath of God and those who are destined for the mercy of God. And it says, what if God, though willing to show his wrath to the objects of wrath, instead was patient towards them so he could show more mercy to the objects of mercy? In other words, if God were just to wipe out a city today, he would take out some of the wheat. If he was uprooting the weeds, if he was uprooting the sinful, he would also uproot some of the wheat. So he says, just wait until the end of the harvest and then we'll deal with it. So he's going to give us the explanation of this parable in a few verses. But meanwhile, he says, he put another parable saying to them, the kingdom of heaven is like a grain of a mustard seed that the man took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it had grown, it is larger than all the garden plants and becomes a tree so that the birds of the air come and make nests in the branches. He told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like leaven that a woman took and hid in 3 measures of flour till it was all leavened. So far, we have a man who sowed, another man who sowed, a man who sowed a mustard seed, and we have a woman, okay? And they're doing all these things to produce fruit, to multiply the kingdom. And so he says, leaven is yeast, by the way. So you take a little bit of yeast, you put it into the dough, and you begin to knead it, and it works its way through all of the dough. All of these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to them without a parable. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter what has been hidden since the foundation of the world. So he's uttering these secret things to them. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He said, the one who sows the good seed, the man who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, Jesus, right? The field is the world, and the good seeds are the sons of the kingdom. The weeds are the sons of the evil one, that's Satan, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil, see? The harvest is the close of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Just as the weeds are gathered and burned with the fire, so it will be at the close of the end of the age, the lake of fire. The Son of Man will send his angels, his servants. They will gather out of his kingdom all the causes of sins and lawlessness and lawbreakers, throw them into the fiery furnace, in that place where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. And then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Now, I need you to catch this, okay? We've had 4 parables told to us, and you've had a man who sowed seed, threw it on the ground, right? Then you have a man who sowed the mustard seed, and then you have the man who sowed the seed in his field, and then the enemy came and sowed weeds, and then you have the woman who did the leaven. These references, none of them are us. We're not the man in any of these parables. We're not the man. God is, or Jesus is. God is the one who casts the message of the word upon the ground, and some bear fruit of it and some don't. Jesus is the Son of Man who cast the seed, the wheat, into the field and grew the wheat. There is the man who put the kingdom of heaven like a mustard seed, and it grew and became a great tree, and all the birds of the air, that's the people, came and nested in it and found refuge in it. Then there's the woman who puts the leaven, who puts the yeast in, the gospel of the message. The active person in all of these parables is a reference to what God is doing, what Jesus is doing. That's very, very important. And if you can get that in your head, it will shape then what you see here beginning in verse 44. Verse 44 and through verse 46. 2 parables in 3 verses. Listen carefully. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up, and his joy sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding a pearl of great value went and sold all he had to buy it. Now, these 2 very short parables, these 2 parables contained in 3 verses, here's the way that was taught to me. Maybe it wasn't taught this way to you growing up. The way that it was taught to me growing up is the kingdom of heaven is an incredible treasure. And when you find it, this is the preacher saying to the audience, this is how I used to teach it. And I hate that I used to teach it this way. I'm so offended by myself that I used to teach it this way. And I would say to the audience, when you recognize the great treasure of the kingdom, you need to go sell everything you have to buy the kingdom of heaven. You need to go sell everything you have to own the kingdom of heaven. Or you're looking for a pearl of great price. And once you find that the gospel is that pearl of great price, go sell everything you have to buy the pearl of great price. Up to this point, the active person in each parable, the one who's doing the sowing, the one who's doing the work, is a reference, at least in one of the parables, clearly to Jesus. Probably in all the parables, Jesus or the Father. Why do we think it's any different with these 3 verses here, these 2 short parables? So the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man, who has that been up to this point? It's been a reference to Christ or the Father, which a man found and covered up, and his joy sold all he had to buy the field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. There's the man, there's that character again. In search of fine pearls, who on finding the pearl went and sold all he had and bought it. How is this not a reference to Christ's work on the cross and him come and buying the kingdom through his blood and through his death and his resurrection and establishing the kingdom of God through his blood? How is this not a picture of Jesus? We make it a picture of ourselves, which we do so often in the text, but keep going with me and you're going to see, like, even the parable after this, again, it's about what God does and not what we do. So the very next parable, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, men drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the ages. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the unrighteous and throw them into the fiery furnace in the place where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. The active party in this parable is not you and me. It's not us. It's not humankind. The agents, the acting agents in all of this are either Jesus or the angels primarily, and I think to a secondary degree, the Father in heaven. So the merchant looking for the pearl of great price, the man who found the treasure, has to be a reference, I think, to Jesus and not to us. And then Jesus says this in verse 51, "Have you understood all these things?" They said to him, "Yes." I kind of wonder if that's just stretching the truth a little bit, like they're too embarrassed to ask. "Do you understand all this?" And he said to them, "Therefore, every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old." And I love this. So the scribe, sometimes in the New Testament called the lawyer, is the one whose job it was to record the Old Testament scrolls and rewrite them over and over and over again. And so there are these Old Testament truths that had an impact in the days of Moses or in the days of Joshua or in the days of Isaiah and Jeremiah. But these things, these treasures out of the Old Testament also spoke to Christ and spoke to the future coming of the kingdom of heaven. So he says that the scribe who has been trained to consider and understand the kingdom of heaven is like a master of his house who brings out of his treasure old and new. So here's what the scripture said, and here's how it points to Christ. Here's these old texts, here's these old prophecies, and here's how they're fulfilled in Jesus, the old and the new. When Jesus had finished these parables, he went away from there, and coming into his hometown, he taught them in the synagogue, as was his custom, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? Are not his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Are these not his sisters with us? Where then did he get all these things? Where did he get this wisdom? Where did he get these signs?" And they took offense at him. They're amazed by his wisdom. They're amazed by his signs. And instead of being in awe of it and going, man, this guy's amazing, they're offended that he's so wise and can do so many miracles. Why? Because he is calling them to the gospel, and the gospel's offensive because it does declare that Jesus is the only way. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his hometown and in his own household. Therefore, he did not do many works there because of their unbelief. And that's Matthew 13. I would encourage you when you're reading through Matthew 13 in the parables, especially with the treasure in the field and the pearl of great price, to reconsider who the acting agent in that parable is. But otherwise, these are hints at what the kingdom of heaven is like, and ultimately the righteousness that will be produced by those who believe the message of the kingdom of heaven, and then ultimately the destruction of those who are opposed to the kingdom of heaven. And so that's the context there. It came out of what he had been saying right before that, the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. So that's very important to remember too, that it came out of, he says on the next day, right? Or am I confusing that? No, that same day. Yeah, that same day. So he said that the same day being when that earlier that day they were saying he's casting out demons by the power of Satan. And so keep that in mind, that these parables are telling the story of those who believe in Jesus and those who don't. And I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, and have a great day. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.